Sweets from cloister nuns in Sicily, beignets in New Orleans, and Portugal's favorite pastry, but in Massachusetts. This week, it's all about sweets and desserts.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Welcome to Destination Eat Drink. I'm Brent Peterson. Destination Eat Drink is for foodies who love to travel and travelers who love to eat. And with Valentine's coming up, I thought we'd do a show dedicated to sweets and desserts. But first, if you like the show, be sure to rate and review us on your podcast app. Those 5 stars help other foodie travelers discover our little corner of the world here at Destination Eat Drink. And if you're planning a trip to Europe, I've got the perfect thing for you. Foodie travel guides to all kinds of cities in Portugal, Spain, and Milan, Italy. Each foodie travel guide has all the best things you must eat on your trip and where to get them, plus great things to do. And there's even a complete foodie travel guide to Portugal that compiles all 17 of my Portugal city guides into one book for just $9.99. Download yours at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink, and thank you very much. We've got so many sweets this week: casata and cannolis in Palermo, pastel de natas in New England, beignets with chicory coffee in New Orleans, and I'm starving, so let's eat.
Destination Eat Drink.
Maria Lawton is the creator and host of Maria's Portuguese Table on PBS. Her latest book, At My Portuguese Table, is available wherever books are sold. She tells me about a delicious contest in New Bedford and Fall River, Massachusetts. And recently, you posted about something that just really tickled my fancy, and that is the New Bedford Fall River Pastel de Nata Throwdown, which I just think is an awesome freaking idea. I love this. But before we get started, I just want to tell folks, pastel de nata is the famous custard tart that you get when you come to Lisbon. It's all over Portugal. It's at any Portuguese bakery in the United States, but it started in Lisbon. It's the famous custard tart. It's absolutely delicious. And then they recently had a competition between the two cities that have the strong Portuguese culture, New Bedford and Fall River, Massachusetts. There's the setup. Tell me a little bit about it, Maria.
Well, what's funny is I had an email sent to me, and it was a woman, Pam Schwartz, and she says, I had the New Bedford food tours she has here in New Bedford, and she goes, I teamed up with my friend, Patty in Fall River, and we've come up with this idea of doing a throwdown, a nata throwdown. And, would you be interested in, in being part of this? And I'm thinking, okay, a nata throwdown. Number one, what an amazing idea. That's right. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, I got to talk to this woman. So she's like, if you're interested, give me a call. This is my number. So I give her a call. And she starts telling me, she's like, we have all of these, and I think we need to, we've got these, bakeries in Fall River that have agreed. We've got these bakeries in New Bedford. We need people to go to these bakeries and try them out. Would you be able to do that and kind of show people, this is what you need to do, folks, go into bakery, do this, do that, get your card stamped and I'm like, you want me to go to bakeries and try out natas? And so she's like, yes. And I'm like, where do I sign up?
Right.
Like, yes. And yes.
No hesitation.
It's just now I have, to work out extra pounds, but it was a job that I needed to do. I felt I needed to do. So it was the neatest thing. So what's funny, again, like anything, which is really funny, is that they approached pretty much all the Portuguese bakeries, and a lot of them went, no, I don't want to. No, don't want to do this. And others were like, yeah, this is fun. And so in New Bedford, there were only 3 bakeries that agreed to be part of the competition. So it was Sunrise, it was Goulart Square, and it was, oh my goodness, I'm going to, Economy Bakery. That's it, Economy Bakery in the North End. So I started with those three because I figured, okay, I've got to start first, New Bedford. I've got to do those three. So of course I'd go in and they followed me with a camera. Followed me with a camera as I went in. And I had to be careful because I couldn't go, oh my God, this is the best. Because I couldn't do that. Because I had to be, everyone has different tastes. I couldn't just say this is my favorite and go from there. It has to be, it's a secret thing. You vote in secret. And so I got to do that. So of course, the first one I go to, I'm like biting into it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. Oh my God. I'm like, really good. And, because there's three things that you've got to look for in a nata. You've got to look for the outside crunch, the shell that it's in. It's a puff pastry crust. So when you bite into it, it's got to go, you've got to have that crunch. The inside has to be nice and creamy, and the texture of it, and the very top of the custard part has to have caramelization. It's got to be caramelized on that top. So it's those three things that make a pastel de nata. So, and we have to call it a pastel de nata because you cannot call it a pastel de Belém because they're the original. There's only one that can only be called that, and that is in Belém. The rest can be called pastels de nata, but it's the derivative of that. I just found that not too long ago. It was like, oh, you can't call it pastel de Belém because that is only in that one place.
It's like a protected origin type thing. Just like a champagne and sparkling wine type of idea.
You got it. So of course I had the three in New Bedford that I did. And then when I got to Fall River, I needed to do those there. And we had six bakeries in Fall River. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do all these? And it's a sacrifice that I need to make, And so I called my friends, the Portuguese kids, Brian and Derek, who are in Fall River. And I said, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods. And I'm going to be tasting pastels de nata and seeing who has the best ones in Fall River and, competing against New Bedford. And so they're like, New Bedford's not going to win. It's Fall River. So there's a lot of trash talk going on. And so I show up at Barcelo's, one of the bakeries that we filmed at. Again, I had the camera following me, and they show up with the mayor of Fall River. Oh, and they're telling the mayor and them are going, so why is New Bedford pastels de nata not as great as Fall River? And I'm like, no, I am not going to go there. No, we've got to stay even Steven. So we went to a few of them. I couldn't do all six. I'm like, and so after the third one, I'm like, I can't, guys. I can't. And I was only taking a bite. I couldn't have a whole nata all the time. This is not going to work. And so we went to Cafe Europa. That was the other one. And we went to Lendy's. I had never heard of that bakery before. So there were bakeries that I went into that I hadn't gone before in, which was really great. And that was the key thing. We wanted, number one, it was a fantastic idea. And I even said that to the two women, Pam and Patty, and said to them, I don't know who came up with this idea from the two of you, but whoever did it, genius. Because it's so good to have a different take on something so fun, so new, and it's right there in front of you. You've got all these wonderful things, but you want people to go out to the different bakeries and try out the different desserts. And while you're there, try out the coffees and try out, whatever. And, there was one bakery I went into and I kept going, wow. because everything was so good. It was the crunch. It was this. It was that. Then they came out with coffees, the made lates. They're like, oh, have this, and then they come out with, oh, and we have a frap we made from natas, and I'm like, what? You have a frap, which is ice cream, cold, whatever, with natas in it. I'm like, no. And they're like, yeah, here you go. Taste it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go into a sugar coma pretty soon because it was, yeah, it was incredible. And it was such a fun thing to do. And they just announced on the 15th, who won, which is great. And so it was Goulart Square in New Bedford that won number 1 for their natas from the 2 places, and number 2 was the Europa or Cafe Europa in Fall River. So it was a close between those 2, but those are the 2 that the majority of people agreed were the best ones. So it was so much fun. It was so much fun. And so of course people now are like, well, who has the best coffee? Oh, now
there you go.
Who has the best Portuguese steaks? I'm like, oh my goodness, I am not doing that. I'm not doing that.
They're opening up all these cans of worms now. These competitions.
Yes. So I can see more happening, but I think Maria is I will pass the baton on to someone else.
You're going to retire. That's good.
Retire.
Well, when you come to mainland Portugal, when you come to Lisbon, I'll take you to some of my favorite places, Maria, and
I can't wait.
We can try the pastel de natas there, and you can decide which is your favorite.
What's my favorite?
I love, and I've heard some people give grief to these kinds of pastel de natas, but I love the mini pastel de nata, and I'll tell you why. First of all, they're like 2 bites, 1 bite if you're feeling, frisky. But I like the fact with the mini pastel de nata, you get a higher ratio of crust to custard. And for me, it's all about the crust. I love the custard on the inside, but I really love that phyllo dough crust that you get. So you get more of that when you have the mini pastel de nata. And that's why I personally love the minis.
Interesting. Here, and the other thing that people are doing a lot of also is you've got your traditional pastel de nata, but then they put like passion fruit on top, or they put, Nutella on top, or they put this on top. And, if you like that, good for you. That's, whatever. But I'll take the original, without any toppings any day. And like you, I agree. It's like that crunch has got to be there. If that crunch isn't there, okay, it's either old, they made it yesterday and you're getting it today, or, you cannot beat a fresh nata. And in some of the bakeries that I went to, they had just come out of the oven.
That's what you want.
And that's
what you fresh out of the oven. And here in Portugal, I found out that you can point to the specific one that you want, and it's not considered rude. I mean, I would be reluctant to do that in the United States if I went into a bakery and said, no, I don't want that one. I want that one. But here in Portugal, it's like expected. And you'll see people in some of these pastelerias hanging back, waiting for the new ones to come out of the oven. And they're like, okay, now we'll get in line. Now we'll go and we'll order one, because when it's warm, the crust is warm, but also that inside, the custard is warm. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it right now. It's
creamier. It's actually creamier that way, which is incredible. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I won't say which bakery I had this, but I bit into it. I picked it up and I'm like, okay, this feels cold. And then I bit into it. It was like they had taken it out of the refrigerator. And I'm like, who the heck serves this? It was, again, I will not share that, but it was like, no, this is not how it should be served. You don't even serve that. It's gotta be, it's gotta be warm. It's gotta be warm.
because then the custard is, when it's out of the oven, the custard is almost runny. And if it's been sitting around for a while, it gets more gelatinous. And I can't imagine if it was cold, if it was sitting in the refrigerator, it'd be even more gelatinous. And that's just, it's just not as good that way.
No, it's wrong. It's just so wrong.
We're going to put them in pastel de nata jail.
Yes, they're in the corner with the dunce cap.
Michelle Michon is founder of Bon Moment Tours in New Orleans. She tells me about the delicious fried treats called beignets and its interesting origin story.
I love talking about the history of beignets because it talks about Black history in New Orleans alongside the French, the Creole. So the word Creole literally just means the descendant of a French colonist. But in New Orleans, that means the French who were having babies with the Spanish, who were having babies with the indigenous population, who were having babies with the free people of color. The Spanish had a law that you could buy yourself out of slavery. And so we had a huge free people of color population, the gens de corps libres. So we had all those folks making sort of a melting pot of culture and their society together. And so the French introduced the beignet as a dessert item to eat alongside your cafe au lait after dinner. So you have your coffee with milk after dinner, and then there's this little fried piece of dough with cinnamon, with powdered sugar. And so the women who are working in the houses, Black slave women who are working in houses, are going down to the French market in the morning to do their shopping every morning. And they start realizing, hey, there's all these guys that work on the river doing heavy lifting, and they don't really have a breakfast food for them. They want something quick and easy to eat and that's sweet and, oily and full of calories that just gets them a little kickstart with their coffee. And so they start bringing out beignets to sell to the guys along the river. And that's how it kind of becomes like a donut. The first donut, the breakfast food, is the beignet. That's how it ends up being, like in the morning instead of after dinner. So next thing you know, the women that own the house get word that the slave women are selling these on the river and making a little bit of money. And there's also, of course, like free women of color doing this. So Rose Nicot is the first Black female that owned a business in New Orleans, and she opened a coffee stall. She was a free woman of color who had made all her money selling beignets and coffee and cafe au lait on the river, and opened her coffee stall in the French market, which is the oldest open air market in the country. So they start rationing, the women of the house start rationing flour on these women. So they don't make this extra money. So the women that were the slave women were very smart, and they start saving up the rice from the serving dishes the night before from dinner that nobody's paying attention to. And they start turning turning that rice into a dough. So they save up the rice and they put a little bit of flour in it, and they proof it with a little bit with the yeast and everything else. But you're using rice that nobody's keeping track of, and you make this dough and sell it and fry it alongside your beignets that you're allowed to sell. And you say, oh, maybe I'm out of beignets today, but I've got these callas. And so that's the name of it. It's calla, like the sort of like the lily, but spelled differently. Calas. Maybe it's two L's. I'm sorry. It's the opposite of whatever the lily is. But anyhow, it's a little fried rice dough treat that's served alongside the beignets for a while. Has a way for these women to sort of subvert around the rules that they were given about making money. So callas are not as found anymore. You can actually get them. Usually, I think at Jewel of the South still sells them. But back to beignets. So the beignets, thanks to what was the Disney movie? The Princess and the Frog. Everybody kind of got obsessed with beignets, and so all of a sudden, Café du Monde is packed. And so you mentioned Café du Monde. Everybody kind of knows about Café du Monde, but there's beignets sold outside of Café du Monde. So you do go there, and there is a secret. There is a cash line at Café du Monde. So look for the cash line. It's shorter. But there's other places to go to get beignets. In the French market, there is Miss Loretta's. So if you're staying in the quarter and you want to get them in the French Quarter, there's Miss Loretta's in the French market. She does a praline-filled beignet, or her children do.
Oh, wow.
The Cafe Beignet. There's a few Cafe Beignet locations in the quarter. I think the one on Bourbon Street is my favorite. It has a little courtyard. It has jazz. It's called Legends Park. It has live music, and it's very relaxing.
I'd always go to the one on Royal Street. That's Cafe
on Royal,
Beignet.
yeah, that's the other favorite.
I love
the Cafe
that place.
Beignet, I believe there's like 2 more locations now that I haven't been to. But yeah, the Royal Street one and the Bourbon Street one are also very popular. But they're getting more and more popular because people are getting sick of standing in line at Café du Monde. So if you are willing to venture out into the Garden District, there's a place called The Vintage that does filled beignets. I'm not afraid of people not taking my tour because once you've had the vintage, I see people in there all the time that were on my tour the day before. So they do filled beignets. They have a s'mores beignet. They have a matcha green tea pudding beignet. They have a raspberry beignet, and they usually have a seasonal beignet. And it is a coffee shop in like the traditional coffee shop way. Like it is a gathering place for the neighborhood. You can go there and do work, but your work day might get cut short because you might see somebody who you start talking to, and next thing you know, you're not doing work anymore. So it is very much an old school feel coffee shop where you just like go and hang out and piss away time, which is kind of what coffee shop started as, where people did business in the French, in the business district. Like that's how our bars came to be. Our cocktail hours came to be, was because people got sick of drinking coffee all day and doing business in the coffee shop, shaking hands and signing papers and changing money. And then around 4 o'clock or so, they want a drink. And so they started drinking, sherries and, wine was really hard to get here because it's too hot. So we can't store it very well. So people started drinking cognacs and fortified wines and brandies and stuff like that. Well, somebody had the idea to put whiskey, water, and sugar together and make a cocktail. And that became known as the old fashioned, because you would have somebody come in and say, can I just get an old fashioned cocktail? I don't need one of these new highfalutin cocktails. I would just like an old fashioned cocktail. And that's how it gets the name. But yeah, so coffee shop. So the vintage also has a bar. So it has a wine, it has cocktails, it has frozen drinks that are like nicer daiquiris. So yeah, spend an afternoon shopping on Magazine and then relax and drink and eat at the vintage right before you head back. There's also a Black-owned business called Stuffed, STUPH''D. They're on St. Claude, and I think they opened not that long ago, right after the pandemic. And I've heard that they're really good, but they do fill sort of like savory beignets too. So they might be worth, if you're in the Bywater neighborhood, they might be worth checking out.
You mentioned Cafe au lait, and this would be a great thing to have with our beignet. But can you describe what a Cafe au lait is, and maybe talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's super simple. It's a cafe au lait in New Orleans means it's chicory coffee with milk. It just means coffee and milk in French. But chicory coffee specifically in New Orleans is the recipe. And it's served with hot milk. So not just adding milk to your coffee. So I grew up with chicory coffee in the 90s, going to coffee shops and wasting time with my friends. And then I went to college in Philadelphia and had drip coffee for the first time that wasn't chicory. And it was very bland to me. And I didn't understand why. Chicory is basically a root of a flowering swamp shrub. So I know chicory, if you're listening in any of the European countries, chicory means to you a different thing than it means to us. Chicory is endive. It's a lettuce, but that's not the chicory I'm talking about. The chicory I'm talking about is a swamp shrub with purple flowers that the root is used. It's a bitterant, so it's used as a digestive. The Mormons, apparently, I also found this out from one of my guests on the tour, is that Mormons drink it instead of coffee because they're not allowed to have coffee, I guess. So it's a bitterant. It's pretty terrible on its own. But the way that it gets introduced into New Orleans, is that during the Napoleonic Wars, when coffee was rationed, they started figuring out ways to stretch their coffee ration and adding chicory to the coffee. And so because it's bitter, it just rounds out and enhances the flavor of coffee. Well, now, and that happens again during the Great Depression. It becomes popular again. But it basically just makes the coffee taste bolder without adding more caffeine to it. So you feel like you're drinking a really strong coffee. But it just has this like bitterant that's added to it that enhances it. So, if you really like chicory coffee, one of my favorite chicory coffee, pounds to pick up for people like traveling is, French Truck, which is the yellow bag. They're kind of a newer roaster. It's only been around a few years. They're newer than more of the traditional roasters, but you can find them in the grocery store. And honestly, I think their coffee, and there's a place called Mojo, MOJO, that also roasts their own coffee here in the city. Pick up a pound from either Mojo Coffee or Truck, and you're supporting a small local business that roasts their own coffee, and it's really good coffee. So that's a great souvenir for people.
Great advice. And I love the story about the origin of Cafe au lait. And I love the story about beignets. I mean, I was just thinking, how can I hop on a plane and get to New Orleans and get a beignet and a
beignets
cafe
unfortunately they're not something. I will say, and we're speaking of souvenirs, grabbing a box of Café du Monde beignet mix for somebody is a terrible gift because nobody likes to deep fry in their house. unless they have a fry daddy. But deep frying, like there's more boxes on shelves in the back of cabinets collecting dust of beignet mix in the world than I think there's actually in Cafe Du Monde. They just, beignets do not keep well. You can if you're a baker or a fryer and it really appeals to you, but other than that, don't buy that for somebody. That's a rude present.
and don't bring a bag on the plane either.
No, it's fried. It's fried.
It's gotta be hot out of the fryer-later, man.
Yeah, maybe that's the beauty of it. That's why people like it, because you can only have it really here.
Right. Right.
It's a commodity.
It's got an expiration date on it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you just can get it here, and then you have to have it as a memory.
Enrica Bruno is a native Sicilian who is a foodie travel guide in Palermo at Alternative Tours Palermo and Culinary Backstreets. She tells me about the amazing convent suites in her city, including one called The Triumph of the Throat. Tell me about the convent suites that we can discover in Palermo.
Yes, so the desserts, sweets are really like a world here. I would say like a kingdom, when you go to a pastry shop. So you really take a lot of time to choose the pastry, the cake you want to try. And so you need more than probably 1 week to taste all the different sweets we offer. The convent suites are a very old heritage. The main, the most popular cakes you can taste in Palermo come from like a convent heritage. In Palermo, there is a very interesting pastry shop, which is located inside a convent. The name is Santa Caterina Convent, and the name of the pastry shop is I Segreti del Chiostro, like the cloister secrets. It's like a hidden gem, like a hidden treasure, located in the main highlights, in the main squares of Palermo Historical Center. It's interesting because this pastry shop was open in 2016 after more or less more than 50 years, more or less more after 50 years. In the past, the nuns of that convent used to make fantastic pastries. Imagine that my grandmother, who is 90 today, remembers that the pastries every Sunday lunch came from Santa Caterina Convent. And she always mentioned the name of a cake that I never tried, like Trionfo di Gola, the triumph of the throat. And I always asked my grandmother, Nonna, what's that? I've never heard about this cake. Oh, she said, that was a fantastic pastries that we used to ask, just writing on a piece of paper the name and gave to the nuns through a turning wheel, because the convent was a cloistered convent. So the nuns couldn't be seen by people. So they used to prepare and to, sell the pastries through a wheel. And they couldn't even talk with people, because in that convent there was a very strict rule, the rule of silence. So the last nuns left the convent in 2014. There were only 3 nuns left, and the convent was too big for only 3 nuns, so they were moved somewhere else. And this place finally in 2016 became a public pastry shop. The nuns, before leaving, left them all the ancient recipes of their sweets. So finally, in 2016, I was able to taste for the first time this fantastic cake called the Triumph of the Throat, which is like a spongy cake divided in different layers, stuffed with custard, nuts, pistachios, almonds, walnuts, and a little bit of marzipan. Marzipan is also, an important ingredient for the Sicilian pastries. So we eat, especially in November, the marzipan fruits that we call martorana fruits, which were instead invented in the convent in front of Santa Caterina in the Martorana convent. So it came also from like a convent tradition. But the main ingredient for our pastry is the ricotta cheese. So if you don't like ricotta in Sicily, well, it's a problem. Okay. Yes, because when you go to a pastry shop, you cannot miss the chance to taste like a pastry with ricotta cheese. So of course, probably you know, but the world know the cannoli, which are these long like rolls stuffed with ricotta cheese. And in Palermo, the ricotta cheese is made with sheep milk, okay, not with cow milk, because we have more sheep than cows in this area of Sicily. And sheep ricotta cheese has much more flavor than the cow ricotta cheese. Or the cassata cake. So we have different varieties of cassata. Baked cassata, which is the most ancient cassata you can taste in Sicily, which is just like a short crust stuffed with ricotta cheese and chocolate chips. It's like a covered, cake and sprinkle at the end with icing sugar. It's very simple, that you can also find in the regular bakeries, and we can also taste as a breakfast. The Italian breakfast is extremely sweet. Or the traditional, cassata, la cassata tradizionale is instead like a spongy cake in 2 colors. It's green and white because it's covered with marzipan and glazed, like a glazing sugar on top, stuffed again with ricotta cheese and decorated, actually I would say wonderfully decorated with candied fruits.
Okay, that's Enrica Bruno. You can book a tour with her in Palermo at alternativetourspalermo.it and culinarybackstreets.com. And for my other guests on this week's show, you can find Maria Lawton at azoriangreenbean.com, and her book At My Portuguese Table is available wherever books are sold. Michelle's website is bonemomentnola.com. You can book a New Orleans food tour there. All right, that's it for this week. Next week, we're in Ravenna, Italy for Pita's Cousin, a dessert as hot as lava and extravagant mosaics. Don't miss that. Until then, I've got lots of new stuff at destinationeatdrink.com. There's the 5 best pastries in Portugal, at least in my opinion, and You can read that yummy story at destinationeatdrink.com/blog. There's also a new video that I've posted. This one's going to be controversial. It's 5 things that they do better in Portugal than in the United States. I've been in Portugal for over 3 years now, and I have some thoughts. Watch that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com or by going to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/destinationeatdrink946. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Edsilla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson, and I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.